Welcome to the True That Show, a show about lifepreneurship presented with wit, humor, and banter by Deborah Drummond and Caroline Blanchard. A lifepreneur is someone who's living life the way an entrepreneur runs their business. All in. Lifepreneurs are rock stars. Lifepreneurs are people who are brave, who risk, who live full on, who think out of the box, who win this thing called life. Lifepreneurs are around us every day. They are everyday heroes. Join Deborah and Caroline, these two stage-walking women who tell it like it is. You'll learn from the most incredible lifepreneurs who will inspire you to be the best version of you. Now here are your hosts.
Oh, Caroline, good morning.
Good afternoon, Deborah. How are you?
Exactly. I'm great. We're in for a real treat today, hey?
I'm not sure, but yes, let's do this. We decided to do a fun subject today. Well, we consider it fun because we're past it. But for some of you who are still in it, first of all, we sympathize. And second of all, just look at the end results. It's all going to work out. So Deb, I'll let you introduce.
Well, and we're not fully through it yet. But we wanted to talk about real life single parenting, parenting bleeps. And not that parents that are together don't have parenting bleeps, but there's something really special about being a single parent. And we've been single parents with, self-employed single parents, working for a corporation, single parents, having other kids in the house, single parents, Caroline's got a few little other stories, single parents. But you know what? People talk about, oh yeah, I'm a single parent. And unless you're in the club, right? You don't know some of the, I always say, like, if you have to get something done, give it to a busy person. But if you have to get something done that's really important, give it to a single parent busy person, right? Isn't it amazing how we make time, like we can stretch time?
Yes. Well, it's also crazy what adrenaline can do. When you're on adrenaline, you don't need to sleep. You don't need to, as much sleep, I should say. But yeah, it makes you produce way more. So there's downsides to being a single parent, but there's upsides. But I know that I was twice because yes, I had 2 marriages and 2 divorces, which the second is not completed yet. I'm in a very special situation. So we separated 3 years ago. It was amicable because we decided to stay 2 civil human beings and not fight. But anyway, so you moved out, and then 2 years after, COVID started. That little thing that started and everyone had to be quarantined. Well, because he didn't want to, whatever, long story short, he said, I'm going to come and spend the weekend because it's going to be easier. And then, we'll be in the same bubble. And guess what? It's a year and a half after, and he still lives here. So it's I could do a whole reality show only on that. But again, we're very civil with each other. We learn to be friends, but it's special. But on the other end, my daughters, because my son doesn't live here anymore, but my daughters, I can see that it brought them back stability, and they're loving it. And they both know we're not together. And it's kind of funny. Like if I look at my younger one who's 13, she's like, yeah, my parents are not together, but they live together. So it's always like, people frown a bit upon it, and they're like, oh my gosh, how do you do it? And blah, blah. And I don't judge anyone, but on this end, we decided to prioritize the younger daughter because the older one is 20. So it's not really like she cares anymore. But anyway, it's a very special situation. It has its very funny moments, and it has its very frustrating, wanting to bite someone moments because I need to stay very polite on the podcast. But the first time I was a single mom, aside from those 2 years, it was my first marriage. I was 30 and my kids were 3 and 5, my older ones. And it was quite special. And I'll give you some of my stories because I am a very forgetful person. I'm clumsy. I'm not detail oriented. So I was single for 4 years and it was quite interesting. But what about you, Deborah? Give us a bit of your story of single parenting.
Well, I think that single parenting, like you said, has its pros and has its cons, right? And I think that, when I used to explain to people that imagine, having to take care of a family. So I had 2 children as well. And when I was single parenting, and I, like you, I had a daughter. I didn't get married twice, but I had a daughter. And then I became a single parent of one. And then I had a long-term, 17-year relationship, marriage. And then I became a single parent. And my children are 10 and a half years apart. So I've been parenting since my 20s and I'm still parenting in my 50s. It's kind of double-sided sword, right? Times where you think you'd be drinking champagne in France in a lavender field and you're actually having a baby instead in your 40s. So it's all very interesting. But so I know what it's like to be together like you do in a relationship, and then also have one child and then 2 children. And it's a double-edged sword in the sense that when you try to explain to somebody, like, how someone else takes out the garbage or makes you a cup of tea or grabs the milk or the eggs or whatever, like that just usual everyday stuff, that becomes like the most stressful things. Like, oh my gosh, I got to pick up milk or I got to pick up something and no one's there to do it for you. For me, it was a lot of all that little things. You learn to manage one budget if that's what you have to do. You manage those big things like transportation of back and forth to school. For those, it was the accumulation of the little stuff that kept me in that kind of static, I won't say anxiety, but that kind of like, oh my God, it always felt like there was a million things to do because you don't have that person. And I remember when I first went through my separation, the best advice that I ever got was from a friend of mine that said, okay, Sundays are going to be tough because there's just something culturally for us here in North America around Sunday Family Day. But they said, for every year you're together, your brain actually needs 2 months to be able to rewire itself to being on your own. And I was like, oh, so I'm not crazy stressed. Like, it was like, because you just subconsciously know, okay, that person's going to do that. For me, it was like, okay, I was like, just tell me when to show up at the airport. And my ex used to take care of all the planning of the trips. I didn't care. I'm like, I got a suitcase. I'm ready. Tell me when. But when I had to take that on or take on things that you don't normally do, my brain had to rewire itself. And because I had such a long-term marriage, it took a while for me to get used to all of those things. And I felt like I was juggling sand. It was like pouring through, and I think I get a grip on something. And the next thing you know, there's sand all over my kitchen floor. I'm like, oh man, this needs doing. So I think for me, it was just a mixed bag of never ending. How's that? And I loved it because you love your children, but there's also a point where, when it's only on you, that it's only on you. So that's where the sleepless and the stretched and that some days it was awesome because no one else made the decision but me. It was like you had that sense of freedom, but then you had this sense of massive responsibility. It's funky. That's why, being a single parent, I have such a big heart for understanding what that's all about, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, and I hear what you're saying. And it's funny, when I listen to you, I'm like, well, you hire an assistant for your flights and you hire a cleaning lady for your house to pick up all the sand, But no, I do get what you say. I think that for me, one of the big part was I feel like I never grew up in my mind. Sometimes I know it's going to sound so silly, but sometimes when I change the toilet paper roll in my bathroom, because I think I'm the only one in the house who knows how to do it. Well, that's what I gathered after all these years with no one ever changing it. So I think I'm the only one. So I still have the reflex of thinking, Carolyn, do it because you are the older one in the house. Your mom's not there. I'm still a teenager in my head. I'm still like, oh, is it really all my responsibilities? And yes, it is. So for me, the first time I was a single mom, and that was really the hardest because they were younger. And I wanted to be that perfect mom. So, they had to be in 2 sports each. So they were in swimming, they were in gymnastics. They had, like, my son had started school, was looking for a daycare for my daughter, wasn't really working out. And I had just found my first big responsibility job that I needed to perform there as well. And it was very much of a men's world there. So I was literally the only woman in that position in our team. So it was extremely difficult because I was also the only single parent. You know, some of them were single parents, but the wife would, the mother would take care of the kids. For me, like, I had to battle really this work environment relationship that was honestly like so hard, because they would really push me and you know, put meetings, let's say at 7 a.m, an hour away from my house. And I was just like, I can't make it. And it was not a question of laziness. I was up at 5 because I needed to get up at 5 to catch up. But daycare was only opening at 6. And, you know, I know daycare was opening at 7, sorry. And so it was just things that were physically impossible to accomplish. So it was creating a lot of frustration. But on the other end, it was also a job that I had flexibility. So I was working on the road, so I could finish at 4:30 or 5 and not necessarily go until 6. I would finish my papers at home at night. But, you know, my kids were in activities 4 days a week. And I was just like, for me, that was like being a good mom and feeding them properly. And oh my goodness, the first time I gave them crab dinner, I felt like I failed. You know, so that was a lot of pressure to keep on giving what I thought was the perfect upbringing, which is not. What I learned in these 4 years, because I remember one day I was sitting there so tired, and I just said, let's order pizza. They barely knew what pizza was because we were only making some at home. When the box arrived, they were like, oh, this is so awesome. And I became the coolest mom. And then when, you know, one morning when I was exhausted and I said, yeah, because I was keeping them on I would be like, screens only 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes at night, you know, trying to be the perfect mom, giving them the perfect life. When I told them, yeah, you can watch another show, I became the coolest mom again. So we kind of became a team of 3. And when that happened, we were in a great synergy. The father was not in the picture the first year and a half. So it was really us, but it became a great synergy. They were little. Like now I'm talking, they were probably 4 and 6, and they would remind me stuff. Like, Mom, don't forget I need this for school. And I was just like, oh, shoot, yes. I remember my daughter having a gymnastic year-end show. You know, when they prepare and they're young and you buy them that dress that costs a fortune that they will wear one time. Well, you know, one Saturday I dressed her up, rushed her and everything. I'm like, go, go, go. It's your year-end show and blah, blah. And I was tired and she was like, are you sure, Mama? And I'm like, yeah. Anyway, we got there. There wasn't a car in the parking lot. And I was just like, that's strange. And then as I'm walking towards the door, I realized it was a following weekend. So, you know, stuff like that. Or when my daughter started kindergarten and my son was in grade 2, we had an amazing day. We went to the park, we went shopping, we had fun. And then I saw a friend after, I don't know, about 4, and she's like, where were you? I'm like, what do you mean, where was I? I was like doing this and doing that, and we had a great day. She's like, it was the first day of school. I'm like, oh my goodness. So anyway, needless to say,
yes,
I was a lunatic parent at school. And I wasn't the youngest mom, but it was really just like, I think you need to forgive yourself because you're thinking for 3 lives that are depending on you. So it's okay, people out there, if you forget things, you're just normal.
Well, and I think we should realize, and it's funny when you said I had a house cleaner and I had an assistant. I'm going to talk about that because that came as a result of from being like, okay, no, I
didn't say you had one. I said, when you talk about this problem, I'm like, okay, well, get one.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you did or did not have one.
No,
but, that's what I was thinking.
No, I want to talk about how you finally get to that place, but I think we should really highlight the fact that when our children were younger, so mine is now 17 and 28, So a little different and years apart, years together, very different, but that I had that same camaraderie, you know, that feeling like when me and my daughter were together, we'd lie on the ground and we would, you know, we'd do different things like we chant and meditate, and she thought that was all, you know, very normal. And we would listen to Jewel, like we'd had headphones on, we'd listen to Jewel, we'd sing really loud, and we do all sorts of crazy things. And there is a relationship that's really super close and super tight that happens. And I think, you know, in later years, they come to appreciate as they start to get older. My daughter now has a baby and she's starting to really appreciate some of the stuff and some of the things that you give up and all that kind of stuff, because, you know, no one I think really goes into it, or a lot of people, I certainly didn't go into it thinking that I was going to be a single parent, right? Some people make that choice. It wasn't a choice. It was situational. It happened, and it happened twice, but that's just how life can roll sometimes. I think that when you think about, we did this before cell phones, we did this before GPS, we did this before like Uber, we did this, like there was no Uber I could call and go, oh my gosh, blah, 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 right? I mean, I would have been the most horrible mother if I stuck my kid in a taxi and sent them to school, even at 10 years old, when my son was 10 years old. Like I would have been looked like, they would have wanted to put an S on my shirt, you know, and walk me through the town. Right. And so now kids go to school with this. They have cell phones. There's contact. You can put them in an Uber. You can have their own account. I mean, you know, I would think I was in my 20s before I got my first credit card. I just took my son to the bank and we sat there and he signed up for his own credit card. And, you know, the level of responsibilities that kids can handle now and take, it's a whole different ballgame. And so it's so very different. I remember this is people are I would never have admitted this before, but I remember being so tired. So my daughter's first night's sleep, through the night she was 5 and my son was 8. I thought I was going to die. I literally went to my doctor when my daughter was 3 years old and I said, cut out every part of me, tie it up, sew it up, do whatever you got to do so I can never. I was 3 years non-sleeping, like 3 years non-sleeping. And he was like, no, I don't think you should. And da, 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 da. And I looked at him, he's like, okay. And he made the appointment. He made the appointment for me. Then of course I didn't show up because I have a son, but I was that exhausted that the thought of ever having another one of these beautiful units in my life that could take every ounce of blood out of me was just not fathomable. But here's an awful story. So I remember needing groceries and I go walking out the door. I forgot my daughter was napping. She was having a nap. And I remember being in the kitchen. I'm like, oh my God, I got to get something. And the grocery store was maybe 3 blocks away at that point. I walked out the door. I locked the door. I walked out to the front. I walked to the end of the street and I was horrified with myself. I have a child and they're sleeping in bed. And I raced back to the house, my heart pounding and thinking that Child Protection Agency was going to show up at my door in 15 minutes and I would never have told that story. How many years later is it? 25 years later, I'm telling that story because I was that exhausted that I literally forgot she was sleeping. And then, yeah. And I think, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say a story there, and my sister may not forgive me, but I don't really care. She had her first one and she was quite young and she was single as well. And she went intentionally to the corner store, which was at the end of the street, because her baby would take like 4-hour nap and he was like soundly asleep. I didn't know that he was there because she left. So I left and I locked the door. Clearly, she didn't bring her keys because I was home. So the baby was in the house locked and we didn't have keys. That was like that. Yeah. And then I was young. I was like 12 and I was just like, but how can you do that? And you said it, no cell phones back then. So you couldn't phone someone. Anyway, the landlord was there, thankfully, and gave the keys. But sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, I mean, she obviously thought you were there, and then the other part to it is when you get to that place, I remember I wasn't financially solid. Let's just put it that way. And my son, of course, hadn't slept. And I remember I was here and I owned my own business and I was juggling the world of self-employment and I had staff and, I felt like I was just giving all the time. And I, loved what I did, da, 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 da. And I remember getting to a point where I did not want to drag my son through the grocery store because at that point you're sharing, right? I'm sharing. I get 2 days a week, you get whatever it is. And I'm like, the one day I get off is for my son, and I am not going to drag this kid grocery shopping. And I remember figuring it out in my head. I'm like, okay, so if I offer my girlfriend, it was $15 at that time. I go, so do you go grocery shopping? She's like, yes. And I'm like, I will give you $15 an hour, which, he was like, 6 and he's now 17. I'll give you $15 an hour to grocery shop for me. I don't care if you grocery shop for you at the same time, double dip, all you want. Come home and put the groceries in my fridge. She's like, done. I'm like, cool. And so, once a month or once every 3 weeks, she would do all my grocery shopping. And I thought, you know what, instead of taking my son out to a movie or this or that, I thought it was $50. It was like $50. At the most, it was $60. And I'm like, small price to pay. And, we probably did eat, macaroni that night or whatever, because we didn't go out. So I had to start kind of figuring out what it was going to cost me emotionally versus otherwise. And I think that's always the dance. And most single parents that I know, at least myself, I kind of waited too long before I did that. Maybe it's because of the voices in my head. It took me a long time to hire someone to clean my house, and, you should do it yourself, and you should be that perfect mom that you talk about, and don't let your kids watch your TV. I'm telling you right now, my kid would not have ever eaten if it wasn't for Barney. If I couldn't have put my kid in front of that TV and do their imagination or whatever it was, or I can hear the Disneyland cruise songs. If I didn't do that and put her in a swing that did this, no one's eating. No one's eating. So I think that whatever we do, however we do it, they all come out unscathed. But the crazy part is who we think we should be versus who we actually can be, and how much stress or strain that stretches us out to be. It's like the decision of when you're going to go buy the baked goods to go sell at the bake sale versus stay up till 2:00 in the morning making, strawberry shortcake cupcakes, right?
Yeah, but to get a bit more serious here, I do understand now, because I'm older and it was my second experience, so I'm experienced. But there's one big thing that we beat ourselves up with, and let's face it, it's guilt. Whether your husband cheated on you, and husband, wife, whatever, your spouse cheated on you and dumped you in the worst ways, you always feel responsible for breaking your kid's life. Like for me, that's how I was seeing it. I was just like, oh my gosh, I shattered their life. And it was not, whatever, I'm not going to go into the reasons here, but I didn't have to put that on my shoulder. And regardless, the separation is always two people, no matter what happens. There's things that bring on consequences. So I always truly believe it's two people that will cause a separation. But as a parent, you put that on your shoulder. So of course, after you try to overdo it, I've seen so many parents that, they have shared custody. I didn't. I was really holding on tight to not share custody, which was fine because he didn't want anyway. So they would visit him on the weekends sometimes. But the big part is I saw parents, like when the kids are with them, then they start giving everything to the kid and gifts and blah, blah. And, some will judge that. I totally get it. I understand it, because you have on one hand on your shoulder, you have the guilt separation, the separation guilt. And on the other end, you want to make sure that all your time with your kid is only quality time. So you don't want to spend some of that time lecturing them. So I had to deal with that guilt a lot. And actually, when we ordered a pizza and started the crab dinner, when I accepted that, it took off such a huge weight off my shoulders. But the thing is, they will know that anyway one day. So whether you teach it yourself or not, eventually they will have friends. And but I remember that then it became, decisions together. And although for me, I'm talking only for me, although it was hard to be a single parent because I was sleeping less, and I love sleeping, and my son is up at 5:36. I remember sitting in the kitchen when he was little and crying because it was 5:15, it was dark outside, and he was full of energy, and I was just like, is this my life now? But I adore him. Where was I going with that? Yeah, the part for me that I actually did enjoy as a single parent is that, I didn't have to consult anyone. I only had to consult my kids. So yes, it did build a special relationship, but I guess the message I wanted to put here is, I know that single parents have a part of guilt that you need to free yourself from, because you're not giving your best if you have that guilt that is eating you inside. And one thing, if I would have to redo those 4 years, one thing that I would understand, because it took me at least 3 years to take a weekend off from my kids. And the first one, like, I was basically sitting in a ball in the corner in the kitchen, and I was just like, oh my gosh, when are they coming back? So it took me a while to accept that I could have fun and I could enjoy myself and be happy without being with my kids. And that's another part. Even as a single parent, your self-care is so crucial, and you have to do it, because it's all the story of the oxygen mask. If you want your kid to be happy, you need to be happy. So that's my experience.
That's your experience. Yeah. I think it's interesting, right? Everybody's got their own idea around separation. They've got their own idea, whether, one person's fault, two people's fault, no one's fault, everyone's fault. Everyone's got their own idea about what it could have been, should have been, would have been, right? And depending on your culture and how you grew up and all of that. For me, I was raised by a single parent, and yet I didn't want to ever be one, because I saw how tough it was. And so it wasn't something that I wanted to sign up for, and I wanted to have. So my guilt was around, oh my gosh, I worked really hard to not end up as a single parent, like as if it was less valuable than a parent together. I think it wasn't less valuable, right? But it was tougher, right? So it can be tougher when one person's doing a project, right? So things have really changed in terms of collaboration and mediation and all those kind of things. It never used to be like that. It was very much, when separation happened, it was very much, I think, more one parent got laden with the other, and there's all sorts of things that happen. I think for me as a single parent, because I am one still, and you kind of are. I don't know. You're special. You have a special situation. And sometimes, you'll never get along with that person that you had that child with. I always say, be really careful who you have your babies with, but, and the other thing is, you can't know the future sometimes. And you know what? Even the best person makes mistakes sometimes. And, not everybody wants to have the same thing, and life changes. So you can never have guarantees. When you go into a company, as much as you might want to be there 20 or 30 years and walk off with the gold watch, there's no guarantee that's going to happen. Economies happen, things happen, right? Like, things happen in the economy. And so I think we all kind of go in doing the best we can with what we got. And I think you nailed it on the head in terms of, I just did not do the self-care. And I didn't do the self-care a lot, probably because, one, I didn't think I had the resources to do it. I didn't understand what self-care was. It wasn't a hot word when I was having babies and I was younger. Like, no one went, you should go do self-care, right? Like, we didn't even go for mani-pedis, right? You couldn't even call them manicure pedicures. Like, there wasn't, it wasn't like, go get yourself a Starbucks. What? There was no Starbucks, right? So it was like, banks weren't open on Sundays so I think there's been an involvement. But I think, letting yourself off the hook and knowing that you've done the best you can with what you have. And for me, the biggest one was that I felt like I was repeating a pattern that I didn't want repeated, because I had an idea that it was easier. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. My girlfriend also had children where the father wasn't active. And I actually started to envy her life, because my relationship with my daughter's father wasn't always amicable. And I thought, man, how cool would it have been to make my own decisions without having to. So, it's always good on the other side of the fence, or the grass, or the greener, or the white post, or whatever it is. But I guess the whole point is just being able to relate and understand. Now there is this thing about having it all and caring for yourself and caring for your children. And the best advice that I ever got from somebody was, the best thing you can do for your kids is to be yourself, because they're going to find out anyway. And I thought, that really drove home. He was a really brilliant man. And he didn't have any children, but he just said, why don't you just be yourself? Because, pretty soon enough, they're going to figure out if that's who you are. And it just relieved me from so much pressure. And I'm like, yeah, I remember, I'll say this within my final statement, my son wasn't happy with the decision that I made. And I was like, you know what? And this messed up with his head. I only used it a couple of times. It was good. And I'm like, he was really mad at me for not letting him have something on his phone, social media, whatever. And he was like so mad. And that used to really guilt me out. Like I used to like want them to love me and love every decision that I did. And I didn't really believe, my philosophy wasn't about being the best friend with my child. It was about, being a parent, but I was like, I love you enough to let you hate me. And he looked at me and I'm like, let me know when you're done and we'll go for dinner. I was like,
Wow.
I don't know who said that, but I wish I'd known that 10 years ago. Anyways, I'll let you have the last word, because I tend to have the last word on these interviews. So you take it away.
Well, you're so right. And there's a million things I could say here, but talking about being friends with your kid, my older daughter, since she's 2, she thinks she's basically 20. So I remember her being probably 13 or 14 in her teenage years. And I said something and she's like, no, that's not really what I expect from my friends. And I'm like, well, I'm not your friend. I'm your mother. She's like, no, we're friends. I'm like, no, I don't want to be your friend. I'm your mother. When you're an adult, we can be friends. Anyway, she didn't talk to me for, I believe it was a good 10 days. And yes, she's strong-headed. So people, if you say that to your kids, say it in a nicer manner than I did. But I do believe too, I don't know if it was all to be redone now with my younger one, my 13-year-old. I am friends with her. I'm a bitter mother. And sometimes she'll look at me and she's like, wow, that's a lot of mothering. I'll be like, well, I still care about your safety and things like that. But I think that life brings you to different places to experience different things, because I have 3 kids and 2 marriages, and none of all of these experiences have been the same. I don't have the same relationship with any of my kids. My marriages have been very different. My personal motivations have been very different in how to raise my kids and everything. And it's really a question of like going with the flow and keep growing yourself. But I guess that the best advice I would give, and it's not coming from me, it's coming from years of experience, and I guess summing up everything is that if you're in that situation, be kind to yourself, be compassionate toward yourself. That's a book that I read years ago, and that helped me so much. When you talk to yourself, imagine that you're talking to your 3-year-old. You would not tell your 3-year-old like, wow, you're such a loser and stuff like that. But you do tell that to yourself. Or I wouldn't look at Deb and be like, wow, you're such a failure. Really? You did that? That's so dumb. I would never say that to her, because I don't speak to people this way. So don't speak like that to yourself, because you are listening always. So be compassionate towards yourself. Be kind. It is hard to be a single parent. It will also bring you, beautiful things. But the best that we can do for our kids is giving the best version of ourselves. And I think that as parents, we all do that. Ultimately, we love our kids and we want them to be happy. And ultimately, whatever you do, they will need therapy later. So that I came to peace with that. Now, when my kids say something, I'm like, I'll pay for your therapy later. So that's about it. And Deb, I will let you say goodbye, because I know that you feel better.
Okay. Well, you know what? And I think Caroline just shared something that when she said that statement, I think that's the best, they say laughter is the best medicine, and you have to humor yourself sometimes. You have to, I know when Ocean gets kind of, tweaky, and I'm like, hey, you know what? Write a book about me one day and make a whole bunch of money about how terrible your life was. And just think, I'm playing part in your massive future financial success, right? You have to joke with yourself. You have to be able to have a laugh and joke and all that good stuff, and just know that it's all going to be okay. And I think the biggest thing is personal development, right? Just keep trying to be the best version of yourself. Read when you can, audio messages when you can. The world is different. There's so many organizations and support to help, and single parents and businesses and all sorts of great stuff, right? And so just, I would say the same thing. It's all good. All good.
Awesome. And just always remember, it's not only happening to you. When sorry, I'm adding something here, but when I started sharing with other moms and being a bit vulnerable and sharing some thoughts that I had, like, oh my goodness, I could have strangled my kids last night, even though I adore them, I would have never voiced it before. And then other moms would be like, because I was hanging out with moms, but other parents would be like, I know, when they do that and you look at them and you're like, oh my goodness. And then you're like, what? It happened to you too? Oh my goodness. So just know you're not alone.
Yeah.
Most parents go through the same thing, and it's okay, human and normal. So if you have a really good parenting story, please reach out to us. Let's make a podcast with you. And maybe also if you're a professional that helps, parenting, contact us. We would love to have you on. And we'll see you next week. Thank you, Deborah.
Yes, thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Caroline. What a great show. Nice to kind of just have a little chit chat here and kind of shine light on ourselves. So have an amazing day, everybody. Contact us if you want to be on the show, and we will see you next week.